She said it at my own kitchen table, in my own house, drinking coffee I made, and I sat there and smiled. That's the part I can't get over, not what she said. The fact that I smiled. My name is Tara. I'm 32, I work as a senior project coordinator at a construction management firm in Calgary, and until about 8 months ago, I was the kind of person who kept the peace at any cost. I paid for things quietly. I absorbed comments gracefully. I told myself it was maturity, or generosity, or just what you do when you marry into a family that runs a little louder and a little more entitled than yours. What I didn't tell myself was the truth. I was being walked on, slowly and systematically, by a woman who had figured out within 6 months of our wedding that I wouldn't push back. My sister-in-law's name is Courtney. She's 2 years older than my husband, works part-time as a fitness instructor, and has what I can only describe as a gift for making her problems everyone else's financial responsibility. She is bright and funny at parties. She is ruthless when she needs something. And for 3 years, she needed things constantly, and somehow, those things always ended up at my door. The coffee comment happened on a Tuesday in October. She'd stopped by unannounced, which she did regularly because my husband had never once told her she needed to call ahead. I was working from home. I had a deadline in 2 hours. I poured her a coffee because that's what you do and went back to my laptop. She was talking about her wedding. She and her fiancé had been engaged for about 14 months, and the planning had become a full-time conversation in our family. Every dinner, every group chat, every visit. The wedding was 11 months away, and already I had heard more about linen napkin colors than I ever wanted to know in my life. She said casually, "The way people say things, they've already decided. We're going to need everyone to pitch in for the venue deposit. It's $3,500, and we're short." I looked up from my laptop. "Between family," she added, which apparently meant me. I said I'd have to talk to my husband about it. She nodded like that was a formality, like I'd already said yes. That evening, I told my husband what she'd said. He rubbed the back of his neck. That particular gesture I'd come to recognize as the one that meant he already knew and had already decided, and said, "She's just asking for help. It's her wedding." I said we'd talked about keeping a tighter budget this year. We'd just bought our house. Our RSP contributions were behind. We had our own financial targets. He said it was family. I've since learned that "it's family" is a sentence that means your logic doesn't apply here. We gave her the money. I transferred it from our joint account, which I funded at a higher percentage than he did because I made more. That was a detail neither of them ever mentioned directly, but it was always there, underneath everything, like a floor they stood on without noticing. 2 months later, she asked for more. Her caterer required a deposit. Her photographer was booking up fast. Her dress alterations were more than she'd expected. Each request came through my husband first, then landed in our account like it had always been headed there. I kept a spreadsheet. I'm not sure when I started. Sometime around the 3rd request, I think. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it the way I do everything at work, methodically, because I like knowing where things stand. The spreadsheet had dates, amounts, what it was supposedly for. By February, the total was just over $9,000. $9,000 across 6 months, and not once had the word repayment come up in a single conversation. I want to be clear about something. I don't begrudge people who need help. My own parents helped us with our down payment, and we paid every cent back within 2 years. I understand that weddings are expensive, and life is complicated, and families help each other. I understand all of that. What I don't understand, what I couldn't accept, was the assumption, the absolute certainty that my income was a resource that existed for her use and that my agreement was just a step in a process that had already been decided without me. The thing that finally cracked it open happened in March. We were at my in-laws' house for Sunday dinner, a weekly event I attended faithfully, cooked for occasionally, and was never once made to feel fully comfortable at. My mother-in-law had made roast chicken. The table was full. Courtney was there with her fiancé, who was polite and vague and seemed to have outsourced all wedding decisions entirely to her. Somewhere between the main course and dessert, My mother-in-law mentioned that she and my father-in-law had decided to give Courtney a cash gift for the wedding, a significant one. She said the number out loud with the ease of someone who has never once had to worry about saying it. Then she looked at me and said warmly, with genuine affection in her voice, "And we know you and my son have already been so generous. It means everything that you've treated this like your own family celebration." Everyone nodded. My husband squeezed my hand under the table. I sat with that sentence for the rest of the evening. Your own family celebration. As if $9,000 from our joint account, majority mine, was just enthusiasm. As if I'd been choosing to do this joyfully, voluntarily, out of love. I drove home in silence. My husband talked the whole way. I don't remember a word of it. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and my spreadsheet, and I made myself look at the full picture. Not just Courtney, all of it. The birthday dinners I'd paid for that got chalked up to treating the family. The Christmas my husband had quietly transferred money to his mother for gifts from both of us without telling me first. The weekend his parents needed a new appliance, and my husband had offered to split the cost with his sister, and Courtney had suddenly been too stretched. So we'd covered it all. It wasn't dramatic. That was the thing. It never was. It was dozens of small adjustments, each one reasonable on its own, each one excused as temporary or generous or just what families do. But added together, over 3 years of marriage, I was looking at a number that made me feel physically sick. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I called my bank. I want to say something about this clearly. I didn't act impulsively. I sat with what I knew for 4 days before I did anything. I went to work. I came home. I had normal conversations. I made dinner. I let myself be sure. On the 5th day, I called my bank and separated my personal savings account from our joint account. I didn't empty the joint account. I didn't do anything dramatic. I simply stopped having all of my money accessible from one place. I also had a quiet conversation with a financial advisor I'd been seeing independently for 2 years, a woman whose office was on 17th Avenue and who had been gently suggesting this kind of separation since the first year of my marriage. I also did one other thing, which would matter later. Every transfer to Courtney's wedding fund had gone to an account that I had set up and was named as the primary account holder on. I'd done it as a favor. She needed a dedicated account for vendor payments and didn't want it mixed with her personal banking, and I'd offered to help set it up. I hadn't thought about it much at the time. I thought about it now. I didn't say anything to my husband yet. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I had that conversation. The next ask came faster than I expected. Courtney called me directly this time, which was unusual. She normally went through my husband. Her voice was its usual breezy, confident self. She said the florist they'd chosen was asking for the balance of the deposit earlier than planned, and could we do an e-transfer this week? I said I'd need to look at our finances and get back to her. She paused. That pause was interesting. It was the pause of someone who has never heard that sentence before. She said, "It shouldn't be that much, Tara. It's just..." I said I'd let her know by the end of the week. I could hear her recalibrating before she hung up. I told my husband that evening. I said Courtney had called and asked for more money and that I'd said I needed to look at our finances first. I said it the same way I'd say I needed to schedule a car service. Neutral. Factual. He looked at me for a moment. Why didn't you just say yes? That sentence. That exact sentence. Why didn't you just say yes? Not what did she need it for, not how much was it, not are we in a position to help right now. Just, why didn't you already agree? I said, very calmly, because it's the 4th request this year and the total is over $9,000 and I'd like us to have a real conversation about that number before we add to it. He was quiet. I put the spreadsheet on the kitchen table, not as an attack, not as evidence, as information, which it was. Dates, amounts, purpose, everything sourced and clear. He looked at it for a long time. She's going through a stressful time, he finally said. And that was when I understood that this conversation was not going to solve anything tonight, and possibly not ever, because the problem wasn't a lack of information. He had all the information. He just didn't think it mattered as much as I did. I closed the laptop and went to bed. I want to describe what the next several weeks felt like, because I think this is the part people don't talk about enough. It wasn't screaming. It wasn't ultimatums every night. It was a slow and very quiet shift, the kind that happens when one person in a relationship starts making decisions independently because the shared decision-making has become a system that only works in one direction. I didn't transfer anything further to the wedding fund. Courtney texted once, then again. Then she called my husband, and I know because he was on the phone with her for 45 minutes in the backyard, and he came in looking like he'd been asked to do something hard. He said she was really counting on our support. I asked what number she was counting on. He didn't have a specific number. I said that was the issue. We kept circling it that way for almost 2 weeks. He wanted me to see that family comes first. I wanted him to see that family comes first had only ever meant his family's needs came first, and specifically ahead of our shared financial planning, our shared goals, our shared future. The breaking point was not loud either. It was another Sunday dinner. This time, Courtney brought her wedding binder. She went through venue photos and menu cards and a seating chart that was already drafted even though the wedding was still 9 months away. Everyone admired everything. My mother-in-law asked about the floral arrangements. My father-in-law nodded at costs the way men sometimes do when they've been told to seem engaged. And then Courtney said, looking right at me with a smile that was perfectly calibrated, I really couldn't have gotten this far without Tara's support. She's been incredible, truly. I don't know what we would have done. The table murmured appreciatively. My husband smiled. He actually looked pleased, like this was a compliment I should feel good about. Something locked into place inside me. Not anger. I want to be specific about that. It wasn't hot. It was cold and clear and final. It was the feeling of understanding something completely. I lifted my water glass. To the wedding, I said. May everything from here be clearly agreed upon in advance. The table laughed because they thought it was a toast. Courtney's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. My mother-in-law tilted her head slightly. My husband was already looking at his plate. In the car on the way home, he said, "What was that?" I said, "That was the last time." He said, "The last time what?" I said, "The last time I sit at a table and get thanked for something that was never actually my choice." He didn't say anything for the rest of the drive. The city lights were doing that thing they do in March in Calgary, where the cold makes everything sharp and everything feels like it's happening at a very high definition. I watched the streets go by and felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was exactly where I was. What happened next was not revenge. I need to say that clearly because I think revenge implies something messy and emotional, and I was not feeling messy or emotional. I was feeling precise. I contacted a lawyer, not to sue anyone, to understand what I was holding. Because here's what I was holding. The deposit account for Courtney's wedding vendors had my name on it as the primary account holder. The funds that had flowed through it, over $9,000, had come from accounts I was on. And because I had been the one making the transfers, because my husband had let me handle the logistics the way I handle most logistics, all of the documentation pointed to me. That cut 2 ways. The lawyer was very calm about it. She said that the account ownership gave me options. She said that several of the vendor contracts, which had been signed using that account, listed me as the guarantor. She said that was a lot of leverage for someone who, technically, didn't want to throw a wedding anymore. I sent an email to Courtney. It was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph said that I was no longer in a position to continue contributing to the wedding fund and that I was initiating the process of removing myself as account holder. The second paragraph was an itemized summary of all funds transferred, with the dates and amounts, and noted that these had been extended without formal agreement on repayment, and that I was requesting a conversation about terms. The third paragraph said that I hoped the wedding was everything she'd envisioned and that I was available Tuesdays and Thursdays if she wanted to talk. I did not CC my husband. He found out when Courtney called him in a panic. He came to find me in the home office. His face was doing something complicated. He said, "You sent her an invoice." I said, "I sent her a financial summary." He said, "Tara, she's planning a wedding." I said, "I know, I've been paying for it." He sat down. I've seen my husband when he's genuinely surprised. It doesn't happen often, he's a pretty steady person. But he had the look of someone encountering a version of me he hadn't accounted for. Not angry. Recalibrating. "She's going to think you're trying to sabotage her wedding," he said. I said, "What does it tell you that her first instinct would be that?" He opened his mouth and closed it. I went back to my laptop. Courtney did not call me. She called my mother-in-law, who called my husband, who came to me a second time that evening looking more tired than the first. He said his mother was upset. He said the whole family was upset. He said, "Couldn't we just work this out quietly?" I asked what working it out quietly would look like. He said probably just continuing the way things had been going. I said, "The way things had been going was me transferring $9,000 into your sister's wedding fund with no agreement on what any of it was, and nobody in your family thinking that was worth commenting on." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I should have paid more attention." That was the first true thing anyone in his family had said to me in months, maybe longer. I nodded. I didn't perform forgiveness and I didn't pile on. I just said, "Yes." Courtney did not respond to my email for 9 days. I know because I kept the read receipt on. She opened it twice. When she finally replied, it was exactly one line. "I don't think this is necessary and I think you're being really hurtful." I wrote back 2 sentences. "I understand that's how it feels. I'd still like to discuss the financial terms when you're ready." 3 days later, she called. Her voice was different, still controlled, but tighter. She said she'd spoken to someone, she didn't say who, and that she understood there were some concerns I had about the account. I said there were, yes. She said that obviously family helps each other, and this had all been very informal, and she was sorry if I felt it hadn't been handled well. I said I appreciated that. I said I did want to find a resolution that worked for everyone. I said that for me, a resolution would include a written acknowledgement of the amounts transferred and a repayment plan. She said that was very formal. I said I'd learned the value of being formal. What she hadn't known, what I hadn't told my husband either yet, was that the lawyer had looked at the vendor contracts more carefully. 2 of the larger ones had been signed with the deposit account's routing information. If the account changed hands or closed before the contracts were fulfilled, those vendors would be coming to me for any shortfalls. That information had been included in a follow-up letter from the lawyer sent to Courtney's email address, which I'd had on file from the account setup. The letter wasn't threatening. It was informational. But information, when it arrives from a lawyer, has a way of clarifying things that conversation hasn't been able to. Courtney called back 2 days later. Her fiancé was on the call too, which was the first time I'd heard him say more than 6 words. He turned out to be quite reasonable, actually. He asked a few direct questions about the amounts and the account structure. I answered them directly. A repayment agreement was drafted, not by the lawyer in the end, though she reviewed it. By me, on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting at the same kitchen table where Courtney had once told me she needed $3,500 the way you tell someone you need them to pass the salt. $2,000 up front. The rest, across 12 months. Small amounts, manageable, fair. They signed it. My husband and I had the real conversation after that. Not the one we'd been having, which was both of us talking around the actual issue in slightly different directions. The real one, where I said clearly, your sister treating our money as a family resource she had claimed to, and you not questioning it, was a choice, not an accident, and it's one we need to name properly if we're going to keep building something together. He didn't defend himself this time. He said he'd spent years just smoothing things over because conflict in his family felt unbearable. He said he hadn't noticed how much of the smoothing had been done with my money, my time, my patience. He said he was sorry. I believed him. Not immediately, but across the following weeks, as things actually shifted. He started saying no to his sister. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way I'd been quietly absorbing things for years, except in the opposite direction. He started asking me first. He started treating our finances like ours. It's not a perfect story. I want to say that. We're still working on things. His family still doesn't fully understand what happened, only that something changed and that I was apparently involved. Courtney makes her payments on time, which I admit I find faintly clarifying every month. Not in a vindictive way, just in the way that facts tend to be clarifying. What I didn't expect was how much lighter I would feel. Not from getting the money back, though I won't pretend that doesn't matter, but from the moment I stopped managing everyone's comfort at the expense of my own. From the moment I stopped mistaking silence for generosity. What I learned in that year, slowly and at real cost, was this. People reveal what they believe about you the moment you stop being convenient. When I was easy, agreeable, quiet, perpetually gracious, I was beloved. The moment I was precise, I was a problem. That gap between beloved and problem is exactly the distance between who they needed me to be and who I actually am. I am not easy. I am fair. And fair, I've decided, is better.